This is BBC World News America. Reporting from Washington, I'm Rajini Vaidyanathan. It's a race to the finish line in the midterm elections. With just 4 days to go, the top guns are out in force, trying to woo voters to the polls. Sanctions are coming, declares President Trump, putting Iran on warning that the agreements made under the nuclear deal are dead. And he may be the fastest man on the planet, but Usain Bolt's dream of becoming a professional footballer have just hit a serious speed bump. Welcome to World News America. There are just 4 days to go until the midterm elections, and the campaign schedule has gone into overdrive. Both President Trump and his predecessor Barack Obama were out rallying their supporters today in the hope that they can increase turnout on Tuesday. One of the states which is being visited most often and watched most closely is Missouri, where incumbent Democrat Claire McCaskill and Republican Josh Hawley are locked in a bitter contest. From there, the BBC's Philippa Thomas reports.
Democrat Claire McCaskill needs all the help she can get. Donald Trump secured an easy victory in Missouri, and though no one here wants to name him, he's still defining the agenda.
The very character of our country is on the ballot this time out.
We have some doors to knock. We've got some phone calls to make.
Fighting in Trump country, McCaskill defines herself as a moderate, not a liberal. That may not be enough to save her.
We got to get outside our comfort zone. We've got to talk to people that we've never talked to before.
Which is why this first-time Democratic candidate is putting in the hours to get out the vote.
Hi there. I'm Patrice Billings. I'm your Democratic candidate from Missouri.
This voter says she's backing Claire McCaskill, but Patrice agrees the senator isn't taking anything for granted.
No, she is not, and nor should she. She is, at this moment in time, not a slam dunk for re-election.
She's found it matters here to be a candidate conservatives can warm to.
I am a gun owner. Men love to talk about guns and weapons, and I do too. And they like to talk about circumstances that I had been involved in as a police officer, and I do too.
There's been a surge of new voters registering in this county, St. Charles, but they don't have to say for which party. And canvassing customers at this vintage car dealer's, I found many still driven by enthusiasm for Mr. Trump. You were also nodding that you think actually energy is up for conservatives?
I think so, and I think that the Kavanaugh confirmation had a lot to do with that. I mean, the way they just kind of drug him through the swamp or through the sewers, trying to belittle him. The guy was highly qualified.
And I agree with Trump in some things I don't. He could stay off Twitter a little bit, but at least you know how he feels about a subject.
McCaskill or Hawley?
I have to go with Hawley.
Hi, my name's Isabella and I'm with the Missouri.
Local Republican activists are not alone in trying to boost Josh Hawley's chances.
Isn't it an incredible honor to have President Donald Trump in Missouri? It's amazing. It's amazing.
The president will be back on Monday, making this his last stop before Election Day, confident that he has the powers to help Republicans harvest those final vital votes.
And Philippa joined us from St. Louis a short while ago. Well, Philippa, Donald Trump held a campaign rally in Missouri last night. He's also going back on the eve of the midterms. How much will his personal presence make a difference to this close race?
Well, obviously the Republicans here are hoping that Donald Trump will make all the difference, will tip the balance, because the polls are showing that in terms of this Missouri Senate seat, Josh Hawley, the challenger, is pretty much neck and neck with Claire McCaskill. The last big poll was carried out by Fox News. Now, Claire McCaskill said at the rally that I was at, Fox News has us neck and neck, and she sounded as if that was positive news, which shows you that she is feeling pretty vulnerable. I mean, this seat could turn, it could go to the Republicans.
And so, Philippa, what issues do you think could swing it either way for this election?
really interesting that from the Republican point of view, it is increasingly about national politics. Josh Hawley, the candidate, is totally with Donald Trump and has been talking about the dangers of immigration. He's been talking about the beauty of the tax cut. He's been talking about the state of the economy. And in a sense, he talks as much about national politics and achievements as he's talking about Missouri. But if you're listening to the Democratic side, they're saying, well, one, their big issue is affordable health care. You know, and they are saying Josh Hawley is a threat to affordable health care and access to that. But they're also talking local, and they're saying, you know, we care about things like the rights of union workers here. We care about rural post offices. And Claire McCaskill, they're saying, has proven herself by, for many years, holding town halls across the state and making sure things get done on that very granular local level. So in a way, Rajini, it's a difference of scale. It's the focus that they're bringing to this.
And Philippa, how key is this seat for the Democrats? How key is it for them to hang on to it?
Oh, it's absolutely crucial, Rajini. I mean, you know, Senate currently 51-49, Republicans to Democrats hoping to take over. But if they can't hold on to one of their own, one of those 49 seats, then they really are in trouble. I mean, you see that for example, North Dakota. You also see it here in Missouri. No Democrat I've met has said to me, we've got it, it's in the bag. They are all saying we need to keep on knocking on doors and we need to get our people energized.
Clearly one to watch. Philippa Thomas, thank you. Well, here to look at a few more of the races which could define election night is Josh Kraushaar, politics editor at the National Journal. Josh, let's start with Florida. I'm going to be covering the results from Florida next week. Two big races. The Senate race there, you've got Democratic Senator Bill Nelson against Republican Governor Rick Scott. And then, of course, the race for governor is also fascinating as well. Let's start with the Senate, though.
Huge race. Florida is always the swing state in American politics. And one of the challenges for Republicans, namely Governor Rick Scott, who's running for the Senate, is how does he play President Trump? Does he invite him on stage, or does he keep a little bit of distance? For most of the campaign, he was keeping some distance, but he invited him to the presidential rally this week because he needs to get Republicans to show up. That suggests that he's running a little behind. He needs that base, even if it risks losing some of those more moderate suburban voters that are moving into the Democrats' direction.
Let's quickly move to the governor race in that state. The mayor of Tallahassee, Andrew Gillum, looking like he could deliver a victory for the Democratic Party there.
Andrew Gillum would be the first African-American governor of Florida. He's been leading in the polls throughout. This has been a very divisive race. It's been argued over race. The racial lines in the race have been prominent, and it's one that Democrats feel they have the lead in.
Let's move west a bit to the state of Arizona, a key race there where immigration has been a really heated debate.
Well, this is a race in the Senate race between McSally, the Republican, Sinema, the Democrat. The Democrat is trying to get to the right on immigration. She does not want to run on immigration. She wants to run on health care. And immigration, she wants to sound a conservative note because there are a lot of swing voters that really care about border security. And McSally is running on Trump's message. She's running a very nationalized campaign like you saw in Missouri. The problem is Arizona is a much more competitive state than Missouri. It's a much more suburban state. And Democrats feel like they've gotten some momentum as President Trump has seen his job approval perhaps tick down a couple points in the wake of his controversies and the response to them. It's been good news for the Democrats.
Let's move to the state of Indiana. Polls there for that Senate race looking incredibly close between the Republican and the Democrats as well.
Very tight. Indiana is a state that is a lot like Missouri. It's a state that used to be pretty competitive. It's moving in the Republicans' direction. Polls are very close, but it's pretty notable that Joe Donnelly, he voted against Judge Kavanaugh, and his numbers start to take a tumble. And if Donnelly loses his seat, it's because the Republican, Mike Braun, has been able to make this race about values and the issues that Kavanaugh's confirmation brought up, and not about the economic issues in the state.
And just briefly, let's move to the governor's race in Georgia. A lot of Hollywood interest in this race as well. Stacey Abrams, the Democratic candidate. Oprah was in town yesterday.
Oprah was in town. Vice President Pence was in town. This is the biggest race in the country, and it's a governor's race. It's just a statewide contest. The thing about this race is there's a third candidate on the ballot. This is a contest that is very polarized. You have a very neck-and-neck contest between Abrams and Kemp. Voting rights has been a big theme in this race. But it looks like neither candidate may get 50%. There's a third-party candidate peeling a few points off. That means we could go to a December election with the President of the United States wanting to weigh in on what's happening in Georgia.
So many interesting races to watch. Thanks for joining us, Josh Cresher.
Thanks for having me.
Now, police in China say the driver of a bus that plunged into the Yangtze River, killing at least 13 people, had been fighting with a passenger at the time. The bus smashed through a guardrail and fell 50 metres into the river, as Stephen McDonnell reports.
A passenger fighting with a driver in southwestern China has led to a tragic accident, with all on board thought to have been killed. She became angry when he wouldn't stop and started attacking him, hitting the driver in the head with her phone. The bus swerved, struck an oncoming car, burst through a guardrail and plunged into the Yangtze River. There were 15 people on the bus, including the driver. 13 bodies have been recovered, but there are not expected to be any survivors. The Yangtze's powerful currents and poor visibility have hampered efforts by diving teams to find the last 2 passengers. Police in Chongqing, investigating the incident from last Sunday, released video footage from the black box recorder. It has shocked people in China who, while used to seeing outbursts in public, are not accustomed to them leading to such a terrible result. Stephen McDonnell, BBC News, Beijing.
Returning now to the midterm elections. Well, we've already looked at the key races, but what about the themes which are prevailing in this election? Well, for more on that, we can turn to John Dickerson, the co-anchor of CBS This Morning, who joins us from New York. John, it's great to have you with us. Now, these elections are the first big test of the Trump presidency. What's at stake here?
Well, it's very good to be with you. And what is at stake is basically what do the next 2 years of the Trump presidency look like? As you pointed out, this is the first time we get a real response from the voters, who are really the only ones who matter. We've had so many months and 2 years, really, of poll results and punditry, and now we get actual results from voters. And so will the House be controlled by Republicans or Democrats? If the Republicans hold it, then it thunders on the Trump presidency. If Democrats control it, then there will be a lot of investigations, and you could imagine Washington coming to a complete halt. How then will the president react to that? He tends to react with double force to things that threaten him. And so that could create a much more even improvisational presidency than we've seen, or a focus overseas from a president who can't get anything done at home because he's being thwarted by the other party. So you see a number of different ways in which this could careen. And we'll all just be sifting through the results on Tuesday night, waiting to see which way it goes.
And John, which issues do you think will help determine which way these elections go?
Well, we only have a preliminary indication in the moment because in the end, if the results turn a certain way, you can say, well, it's because this issue or that issue mattered. The two most important on the table at the moment are the president's singular focus on the issue of immigration. Well, I shouldn't say singular, but certainly the overwhelming thrust of both his remarks and the energy of what he's saying. And as the Washington Post put it, he's hitting every button on the dashboard of the presidency, which is he's talking about ending birthright citizenship through an executive order, which is not possible. But anyway, it's something he's talking about, and he's sending troops to the border to protect against a caravan that is 800 miles away. All of which is to take the office of the presidency and align it towards an issue set that he wants to talk about in the remaining days of the election. Well, will that turn out the kinds of voters in his party that he thinks, or will it not work? Democrats have been focusing on the issue of health care, and so we'll see if they turn out their voters having talked about that issue. Also, has the president goosed one portion of his constituency, and that might turn out in a state like Montana, which is having a Senate race, but then that doesn't turn out for him in a number of those House races, which are in districts where the issue of immigration and the way in which the president talks about it actually might turn off some of the voters he's trying to appeal to rather than bring them to the polls.
John Dickerson, thanks very much for joining us. Now, a top Turkish official says he believes Jamal Khashoggi's body was dissolved in acid after being cut up. It comes after reports the Saudi Crown Prince told the United States he considered the journalist to be a dangerous Islamist during a phone call to the White House. Mr. Khashoggi was murdered exactly 1 month ago. His body has still not been found. An Australian man's been sentenced to 10 years jail for encouraging his wife's suicide in a case believed to set a global precedent. Graham Morant's wife was not terminally ill, and a judge ruled he was motivated by her life insurance benefits. The actor Alec Baldwin's been arrested in New York for reportedly punching a man over a parking space. Police say the 30 rock star was taken into custody over the incident, which took place in the city's East Village. Baldwin's been in the spotlight lately for his impersonations of President Trump on NBC's Saturday Night Live. You're watching BBC World News America. Still to come on tonight's programme. Sometimes you have to let the spirit move you. That's how one congressman's describing his campaign moves. Japan's approved draft legislation that would radically change the country's immigration policy. The bill would allow hundreds of thousands of foreigners to apply for work in Japan for an initial period of 5 years. More highly skilled workers would be able to bring their families and stay indefinitely. Our correspondent Rupert Wingfield-Hayes reports from Tokyo.
I think this is a significant change for Japan, which has in the past been very resistant to the idea of greater immigration, greater influx of foreign labour. But it is also an admission of the reality that Japan simply doesn't have enough people to do all the jobs that need to be done. And that's because of long-term demographic change here. Since the 1970s, Japan's birth rate has been well below replacement. It's now around 1.4 per woman. It also has the oldest population in the world. Japan's life expectancy is now around 85.5 years. And that means you have a lot of old people and not enough young people to do the jobs.
In a tweet that looks straight out of Game of Thrones, today President Trump put Iran on notice that sanctions are coming on the 5th of November. It follows the White House decision earlier this year to pull out of the nuclear deal negotiated in 2015. Most of the other signatories to the agreement have worked to preserve it, but since his days as a candidate, Mr. Trump has made it one of his key targets. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now by our State Department correspondent, Barbara Plett-Usher. Firstly, Barbara, how sweeping are these sanctions?
Sweeping. It's the big stuff. It's the core sectors of Iran's economy, so energy, banking, shipping. It's maximum pressure is how the Americans put it. They want to force the Iranians to negotiate a new deal that's broader than the nuclear accord. So 700 individuals and entities put on the blacklist, and the oil market, oil sector in particular, targeted because that's 80% of the revenues. And you know, the Americans don't actually have much economic ties with Iran, so they're using their economic muscle to force Iran's customers, other countries, to stop doing business. Otherwise, they say they will cut them out of the U.S. financial system.
What sort of countries are we talking about that this could have an impact then? Those customers?
Well, China and India are the two biggest customers of Iranian oil, and there are a couple of others, Turkey, Japan, Korea, and these countries we believe will be getting carve-outs initially from the Americans. 8 countries will get exemptions, temporary ones at reduced levels of import. But it's a recognition by the Americans, actually, that it's not all black and white. They have to be careful about the stability of the oil market. They can't just cut all the oil off at once.
Now, of course, Barbara, this nuclear deal wasn't just done with the US and Iran. There were other allies, European countries, that were part of this too. Where does this leave them?
Yeah, they're really against this. They're trying to preserve the deal, trying to find ways around this. The Europeans have put together a financial mechanism to help their companies work around the sanctions, although the Americans are very dismissive of that. They say it's not significant, big companies aren't going to use it. The Russians, they say they're going to keep on trading. Not entirely clear how that will work. The Chinese, again, one of the biggest customers, not clear what they'll do, but they would have the ability to set up trade in a different currency than the dollar. None of this would be very efficient. It wouldn't necessarily work all that well, but it is a crack. These are cracks in the united front, which Iran could exploit.
Now, Barbara, I remember during the 2016 campaign, Donald Trump at rally after rally saying that he was going to scrap this deal. How much of this is a success for him in fulfilling one of his key campaign promises?
Well, promise made, promise kept. That's what he likes to say and do, and also that he is being tough with America's adversaries. And you mentioned that tweet, which is quite theatrical. You know, sanctions are coming rather than winter is coming. I have to say, the State Department's been quite theatrical about this as well. They've got this countdown to sanctions on their website. And I asked an official, is this really necessary? Because it's the Iranian people that are going to suffer in the end. And even if they don't like the regime, it sort of feels like you're rubbing their noses in it. And he said the Iranian people know whom to blame for their economic situation.
You mentioned the Iranian people could suffer. In what way could this impact the people of Iran then?
Well, it is going to affect their businesses. They were starting to make business agreements, say, with European companies, which have ended those agreements or aren't taking their calls, basically. Could affect supply of things like medicine, for example. Now, there's supposed to be humanitarian carve-outs, but in actual fact, given all the complexities around what's allowed and what isn't, the supplies dwindle of these kinds of humanitarian things and others, and just the state of the economy as well. It's in bad shape, not only because of sanctions and because of mismanagement, but it's expected that this is going to make it even worse.
Barbara Pletasher, thanks for joining us. Now, what links President Trump with the hip-hop legends Tupac Shakur and Christopher Wallace? Well, they've all posed for the Dutch photographer Dana Berg. She just published a book sharing the stories behind these iconic images, and Anna Holligan went to meet her.
Rivals, reunited. Tupac and Biggie epitomised and glamorised thug life. Their brands were built on bravado, but these intimate shots reveal another dimension. A slower style of photography helps to disarm her subjects.
I work with a large format camera, a 4x5-inch field camera, so it's on a tripod. It's not very dynamic.
But it's also a reflection of something else.
Just see the floor, just maybe. I think there's a lot of myself in the portraits I shoot, because every photographer will bring out something else from the person.
In a time of fake news and alternative facts, these images are striking in their honesty. These unfiltered portraits perhaps satisfy a universal desire for truth and transparency.
Trump is a little bit, in some ways, the old one out, because he wasn't really easing into the shoot. I'm making something happen, but I'm also waiting for something to happen. But he didn't like that, so he felt I was sneaky. He called me sneaky. He said, "You're sneaky," and he made me count to 3. So I had to go 1, 2, 3.
Most of her subjects do appear to have faith. And in the case of Tupac and Biggie, over the decades since their deaths, their enduring legacies have been partially shaped by what Dana Berg captured through her lens.
These pictures have started to live a life of their own. So this side of the poster is showing the whole, the kind of rollout of the images over time. I guess that's what, in a way, the power of images is, that they become, people reference images to remember something.
Anna Holligan, BBC News, Amsterdam.
Well, few would have thought that in 1998, when that photo of Donald Trump was taken, that he would end up as president, probably himself included. Well, he may have been the fastest man on the planet, but Usain Bolt's dream of becoming a professional football player has hit a serious hurdle. The Olympic sprint champion was on trial with an Australian club, but now he's leaving after contract talks failed. Our correspondent Phil Mercer reports.
This is probably the end of Usain Bolt's football fairy tale in Australia. It appears to be money, not ability, that's forced the Olympic champion to leave the Central Coast Mariners. The club had offered the Jamaican legend a contract that was well below his reported wage demand of more than £1.5 million. Third-party sponsorship couldn't be found, and the Mariners, who finished bottom of Australia's A-League last season, have thanked Bolt for his dedication.
It was great to see Usain grow so much with us. We said before he came that that we know that he was going to be a fast learner, and he showed that. And the goals that he scored at Campbelltown will go down in history, and he's got that to take around the world and to leave as a real credit to his football ability.
His ability, though, has been under intense scrutiny. The former Republic of Ireland striker Andy Keogh, who plays for Perth Glory, said the former sprinter's first touch was like a trampoline and he would never make it as a footballer. His box office appeal, however, is beyond doubt. A crowd of almost 10,000 people turned out to watch Bolt in a pre-season friendly for the Mariners. In October, Bolt turned down a 2-year deal with Maltese champions Valletta FC. Phil Mercer, BBC News, Sydney.
Now, this is my favourite story of the programme. We've got one last piece of video we want to show you. Now, during these midterm elections, there hasn't been a lot to dance or smile about. But yesterday, Georgia Congressman John Lewis certainly showed us he's got the moves. Well, the civil rights icon was attending a rally for the state's governor's race that we mentioned earlier in the programme when the song Happy turned into a dance party. Now, at 78 years old, the congressman's encouraged people to vote like they've never voted before, and he proved that campaigning can still be a bit of fun. Look at him move there. Well, remember, that's all we've got for the programme right now, but you can find more coverage on our website, and you can see what we're working on Twitter. My handle is @BBC Rajini V. I'm Rajini Vaidyanathan. Thanks very much for joining us on BBC World News America.